Welcome along to the Make It Count podcast. My name is David.
My name's Matt.
And we are the Taylor Bros.
Indeed we are.
Making it count every week if we possibly can. Yeah.
There's not a moment of our lives that we don't make count. That's why we are the masters.
100% hitting record. Yeah. Never missed a second.
Never wasted a moment or a day.
So anyway, I hope you're enjoying our hyperbolic introduction.
Of course. For those not based in the UK, there's heavy doses of sarcasm in there.
Yes. But we're attempting to make it count. Matt, you sent me an article?
I did send you an article. I can't remember the title of it, but it was on the University of Cambridge, I think, website. And it was some research they did with another university. And the findings were... It was about depression.
Yeah, it was on the topic of depression.
On the topic of depression. And they were investigating obviously, it's a highly complex subject, many different factors going into it. And they were looking at what are the biggest influences on it. Is it DNA? Is it social factors? Is it diet factors? What are the different factors that play into likelihood or risk towards depression?
Yeah, so from reading it, it seemed like they were predicting that the biggest influence would be DNA or the genetic component. They were thinking this is going to be the biggest one. There's some people are just maybe more genetically disposed to depression.
Yeah.
So from what I remember, they looked at 290,000 people.
Yes.
And 13,000 of them had depression.
Yes. So that was based on, I think, a database that had been collected over a 9-year period. Mm-hmm. So it's not they went and interviewed that many people.
Yeah.
It was based on data from a database. 209,000 is a huge data set.
Yeah, and so of them, 13,000-ish were identified as having depression.
Yeah.
I didn't work out the percentage of that, but it's actually
I
not
didn't
that
either.
big.
Yeah.
I mean, what's that, like 10, not even 10%?
That's about what you would think about 3%.
Yeah.
10 of almost 300,000.
Yeah. So, not a huge amount, interesting. But what was interesting to you about the article?
Well, so I noted down the different, so they obviously, you have DNA was one sort of factor they were looking at, and then they looked at 7 different lifestyle factors.
Mm-hmm.
I'd just like to list these and ask you and the audience to think, which of these do you think would have the biggest single influence on the likelihood or risk of depression? So first, DNA. What's the impact of that? Then you've got alcohol intake, smoking, sedentary levels. How sedentary are you? Exercise, social connection, healthy diet, and sleep.
Mm. Yeah, and I remember when I looked at this, I was writing some notes down. It felt like there were like 3 or 4 that were do these things.
Yeah.
So, your sleeping, your healthy diet, your physical activity, and your social connection. And there were 3 or 4 which were don't do these.
Yeah.
Too much alcohol consumption, don't smoke, don't be sedentary.
Yeah.
I can't answer this question without knowing the answer.
Well, of course.
Because I looked at it. But they found, from what I remember, the biggest factor affecting depression was a healthy amount of sleep.
Yeah.
7 to 9 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, they said that was the single biggest impact, and then closely followed up, I believe, by connection. Which, again, that didn't surprise me. I think healthy connection seems to be the antidote or like the antithesis of depression, which typically is an isolating thing.
So why was that interesting for you?
Well, the thing that I suppose, to stop beating around the bush, I'd like to read a quote from one of the scientists that I think had worked on this, Dr. Barbara Sahakian from University of Cambridge. And she basically said, although our DNA, the genetic hand we've been dealt, can increase our risk of depression, we have shown from the research that actually a healthy lifestyle is potentially more important. So the findings basically, and I noted these down, they said whilst they looked at DNA and they said the people that the highest risk when it comes to the DNA factor compared to the lowest end, there was a 25% difference. So if you basically dealt a bad hand, you were 25% more, increased risk of depression. But then they looked at the lifestyle factors and they looked at those 7 and they kind of placed people into 3 categories. Unfavourable, so basically not really hitting any of them. Intermediate, you're hitting a few of them well. And then favourable, you're probably hitting most of them, sort of low alcohol, smoking, sedentary, healthy diet, connection and everything. and they said, comparing just the people that hit a few to the unfavourable, there was a 41% difference in risk. It's like huge. That's almost twice as much as the DNA thing. And then if you're in the favourable group compared to the unfavourable, a 57% difference in risk of depression. And so they said, of course, DNA plays plays a part. 25% isn't insignificant, but you can actually countermand a lot of that with these lifestyle changes, because 57% change in risk is much bigger.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose when you're suffering depression, I don't think I've ever struggled or suffered with it, but those things are harder. That's the impression I get. It's was it the famous Winston Churchill thing of like a black dog on your back? It's like this heavy weight everywhere, and it makes physical activity and moving and social connection and all of these things more difficult. And some people definitely need more intentional help with that. But actually, for all of us, there's a preventative aspect to this. So if you're intentional with getting good sleep, which is the number one factor, and we know sleep helps in physical recovery, but apparently also this is suggesting mental and emotional recovery as well. And it's not for nothing that we're designed to sleep, to basically be unconscious for nearly a third of the hours of a day.
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, and you hear people talk about it still every now and again, like this idea of, wow, sleep feels like such an unproductive, complete waste of time. Like, what could you do if you could sleep 3 hours less each day? You know, wow, you would have so much more time.
I mean, I always thought it was a bit of a supervillain thing to do, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I only have to sleep for 30 minutes in this pod, and I can do dastardly things for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an element of the reason why all supervillains have that is because they're sleep deprived, and so they get like psychotic or something.
I mean, who knows? I'm sure there's a deep backstory there.
But yeah, I think I'm moving more towards this idea of actually for every hour of sleep that I get, good quality hour, it improves the hours that I'm awake. You know, I enjoy them better. I'm able to show up more. So I'd rather invest that time there. And we've spoken about that before.
Yeah, and I, like you said, really, it's a bit of a binary way of looking at it, but for many of us, we're driven by a to-do list, by being productive. And sleep is not really a priority. Like when you wake up, I really accomplished a lot. I had an interesting dream. Or more likely, don't even remember any dreams I had, you know? So it's like, you don't even get the productivity of like having a fun dream to remember when you're awake.
Or, you know, like Isaac Mendeleev dreaming up the periodic table.
Oh, yeah.
In our sleep.
It's cheating, isn't it? But yeah, we've got to, I think, for many of us, change our mindsets around that and just go, this is good for me. This is good for my physical recovery. If you've been up and about and you've walked and you physically exercised, you know your body needs recovery. It's like, you know, they talk about working out in the gym. You don't get stronger in the 30 minutes to an hour you're in the gym.
No.
You get stronger in the recovery, and that includes your sleep. And so
massively.
The most fit people in the world, the athletes we look up to, are really intentional with that aspect of their lives. They're not shorting it. And the athletes that aren't shorten their careers. And you see it. You can see someone like Roger Federer, who carried on playing at the very highest level of tennis until, what was it, late 30s? 40 maybe?
He was on that 40 boundary.
Yeah, and yet you've got other players, which I'm not going to say any names right now, but they look 10 years older than him, and they're actually 10 years younger than him. And
maybe he's got some good face cream as well.
And you maybe read about them in the newspapers a little bit more for late night antics and things like that, and you get the impression that actually maybe they didn't take the side of the game or that side of their life of sleep and recovery and not so much alcohol consumption seriously. Someone like James Milner for Brighton, professional for England player, and he basically has never had a drink of alcohol in his life. Ever.
Wow.
I think he had like a sip when he was 16, but he said, I'm not going to do that.
Wow.
Even though, and he's like, you know,
what an advert for
mid
after your body.
Mid to late 30s, and he's still one of the fittest players at Brighton and
in the Premier League.
And that's an elite level. And you sort of think, well,
wow.
You know, so there's lots of stories we could talk about, and that's the physical side. But we're here talking about the links to depression and just going, there's a mental recovery, there's an emotional recovery, and the people that are sleep experts out there, they go and say, your body or your mind during sleep processes the day and sort of gets rid of the toxins almost from the day. That's the best language I have for it.
That's my
I'm not a
understanding.
neuroscientist.
That's as high level as it gets. The bad stuff gets gone away.
Yeah, and if we short that, then we're actually leaving those things in our brain.
Yeah.
And is it any wonder that sort of bad things start to happen at that point? So maybe we'll do another episode at some point on healthy sleep. Maybe we won't, because we're not sleep experts. Don't put your pressure on to sleep is my main advice.
Yeah.
Just breathe. Just relax.
Yeah.
You're meant to be safe and don't force yourself to sleep and be calm.
We're not experts on sleep, but there is a book I've been meaning to read, which is Matthew Walker's one, Why We Sleep. Definitely worth a look. I've heard some good stuff about it.
Yeah.
But we know of some good practices. I think we've talked about it before. I'd like to just quickly highlight another quote I found from this, really interesting, from another one of the researchers as we close, because it relates to what we talked about last week. This was from the University of Fudan, Professor Feng, and he said, "We know that depression can start as early as adolescence or young adulthood. So, educating young people on the importance of a healthy lifestyle and its impact on mental health should begin in schools," which obviously is great. In light of our conversation last week, that's where it's obviously interesting, because again, there was that research that suggests that some of the programs rolled out and being rolled out now in best intentions are actually not necessarily helping. And partly one of the things, I'm not sure how much we touched on it, but was this idea of we've given enough information about the problem, but not quite enough to actually really help with the solution, and a little bit of information that tells you here's a big problem and here are some labels that are, you can identify with, without then really getting into, now these are the practices that we need that are going to help us, and actually helping bed them in is a dangerous thing. In other words, common knowledge isn't necessarily common practice, and that can be a problem because we know the solution but we don't really know it because we don't do it.
Yeah, so put it into practice. Just sleep better, guys. Come on, make it count by going to sleep.
Going back to the final thing, obviously the last thing we want to do is basically say, look, nobody should be depressed because you just need to live healthy. That's totally not what anyone's saying. There are clearly DNA factors and family factors and environmental things at play, but there's a great encouragement here. We can help others and ourselves. So what does it look like? Even just hitting on a few of these, if you're in the interim group, you reduce your risk by 41%. So what does it look like? What could it be? A little bit more movement, a little bit more social connection, thinking about diet, and of course, cutting out smoking and alcohol, more.
My advice, would be focus on the one that makes the biggest difference.
Yeah.
And that's sleep.
That's why you focused on that.
That's why I focused on that, because that's the big move. You start with the big rock and then you can go to the other ones.
Yeah.
Right, that's us this week. Make it count.
Go and get some good sleep, guys.